Hi, this is Jerry Amernick. I'm the author of Babe Ruth, The Superstar's Legacy, which is now available on Amazon, Amazon.com, in both print and as an ebook, and also at the site BabeRuthLegacy.com. Today we're back with the Babe Ruth Legacy interviews, and we're going to talk to a member of the Ruth family, Brent Stevens, who is Babe's great-grandson. Brent's father, Tom, wrote the foreword to the book, and his grandmother, Julia, is Babe's daughter. Brent is the co-creator of the website BabeRuthCentral.com, and we're going to talk about that. Welcome to the series, Brent.
Thank you for having me.
So, you're the great-grandson of Babe Ruth. Tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up with Babe Ruth. Now, you were born, what year were you born?
77.
Okay, so that obviously, it's almost 30 years after the Babe died. What was it like growing up with Babe Ruth? And of course, you have stories from your grandmother, Julia, I'm sure.
Absolutely. So I think the first time I really started to realize how special my great-grandfather was around 8 or 9. I actually found a children's book that talked about the Babe. And I started to get a sense of just how impressive he was as a baseball player. But it's what kind of intrigued me to learn more about him overall. And that's when I started asking questions of my great-grandmother to learn about Babe, the person. And that's when he became even more impressive to me.
Right. Okay. Now Claire, of course, she passed away in '76. Babe's second wife, and one who's credited really with turning his life around, I think. Julia has many members of Claire, but of course you were born just after she passed. Is that right?
Yeah, it's always something I kind of regretted. Of course, nothing I could do, but she passed just before finding out that I was going to be coming. It would have been nice for her to know that she was going to be a great-grandmother.
Oh, yes, right. Tell us some of the stories then that Julia has told you about Babe. I mean, she's the last surviving member of the Ruth household from those, glory days in New York City in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. I'm sure she's told you many stories. What kind of things has she told you?
Yeah, obviously her stories are very personal, and the things that come to mind most, one that always stands out to me, it may be one that my dad shared, but out of the risk of repeating, the fact that at the holidays, that were always very special times for the Babe, given the fact that, he didn't really have those moments growing up as a child. So he really embraced them as a father and the head of the household, like how he took such pride in cutting the turkey at Thanksgiving, or taking personal ownership of applying all the icicles on the Christmas tree.
Right.
But I think the stories that most stand out to me are those that my grandmother had just from her experience of traveling the world with the Babe in 1934.
Right.
So she kind of was given the choice. She could either go to college or she could come join them on this barnstorming trip pretty much around the world, with a primary focus on the Asia and Pacific region. And, back then, I guess, there wasn't quite as many opportunities for a woman, in the career field. So I think she kind of thought, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be able to travel the world with Daddy and my mother. And
yeah.
So she took him up on it, and the stories that she had were tremendous.
Yeah, well, when I saw her, and it's going back a few years, I think she was a spry 94 at that time, and believe me, as sharp as a tack. And she told me stories. I remember asking, how was he greeted by the Japanese? And she said, like a god. And then she went on to describe the whole event. So, with you, have you had the opportunity to meet people or come into contact with people or celebrities or sports people because of your relationship being a member of the Ruth family?
Obviously. It's been such a great experience at times as a result of being his great-grandson. The opportunities I've had to meet, obviously I was a big baseball fan growing up, and the fact that I was able to meet people like Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio and Wade Boggs, and most years my dad goes back to the Hall of Fame for the Hall of Fame inductions, and I try and go as often as I can. It usually tends to be every 2 or 3 years, and
right.
It's just fantastic to be able to be in the same room as these excellent ball players that have been, a part of the Hall of Fame, and just hearing some of their personal stories. It's pretty fun.
Well, I sent the Hall of Fame people a copy of the book, and just as it came out, and we're hoping to go down there and do some talking about the legacy of Ruth as well. So tell us a little bit about the site BabeRuthCentral.com, how that came about. And as I understand, I think we had this chat maybe some time ago, it stems from an experience with your sister coming home when she was in, high school or middle school, and there was a reference to Babe Ruth in her school textbook. Is that right?
That's right. So at this point, I had, I'm a little bit older than my sister, and I'd kind of been off at college, and my dad recounted the story of my sister coming home in tears because in her American history textbook, it had a caption on the Babe about, his big home run numbers of 714 and 60 in the season. But it also goes on to call him a womanizer and an alcoholic.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, we know in the media that there's many times he's been portrayed that way, but we know within the family that that's not quite the case. And so I kind of took that moment as an inspiration to tell the family's perspective on the Babe and a more accurate portrayal of Babe the person, to try and correct some of those misconceptions. Because in fact, Babe the person is a pretty admirable individual, as you well know, given all your research. And I felt it was important to tell that more accurate story and ensure Babe had a positive legacy going forward.
So on the website, which you started, what was that, 2007, or what year was that when you started that? And you started it with a friend.
2007.
Okay, the friend of yours. So in a nutshell, tell us what's on the website and what is it that you hope to do with the website?
Yeah, so really, the intent is, like I said, of course, to acknowledge all his great accolades as a baseball player, and to really kind of put it in perspective, just how significant he was in influencing the game, and just how far apart he was from every one of his competition at the time which he played. But then to also focus a lot on the personal aspects. Babe the human being, Babe the family man. Also, there's an aspect of where I've also done a lot of interviews about from sports writers to authors that may have had some experience in getting to know the Babe in some way based on the research, and just getting their impressions and capturing them for the site. So also trying to talk about some of the aspects he's had from a positive legacy perspective, whether it's his influence in changing the game to his influence as an international ambassador with that 1934 barnstorming trip,
sure,
and things such as that.
Well, let's just talk a little bit about baseball for a second, and I talk about the book where I say it certainly goes beyond baseball, and it does. But you've got some of this information on your site, where we look at the coming of Ruth the hitter, where it meant the end of the so-called dead ball era and the arrival of the live ball era. And I know on your site you've kept some of these stats where when Ruth was making the transition from a pitcher to a hitter, which really was over the course of several seasons. The thing that is interesting, and in those seasons, is from 1918 to 1921, the total number of runs scored in Major League Baseball jumped from 7,382 to almost 12,000, an increase of more than 60% in just 3 years. And in the same time frame, the total number of home runs went up by almost 400%. And it's really solely because of him, which is just monumental.
Absolutely. Just the whole strategy of the game changed. There was at one point an intent. Of course, yes, the ball changed a bit as well. But just the focus was all around base hits. The concept of trying to go for the long ball just didn't even exist. And then here comes this guy, new to the scene, who evolved from a pitcher to a hitter, who just fans gravitated to. And as a result of his home runs, and it really caused people to kind of pick their heads up and say, this is a different way to look at the game. And
absolutely.
And that's what they started to evolve.
Yeah, and never mind the Black Sox scandal with the World Series with the Chicago White Sox and what happened with that. I've been told by a curator at the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown that Ruth actually saved baseball twice, not only once. So he's got quite a legacy in that regard. Now, one thing it's an underlying theme in my book is that Babe Ruth stands the length of time, stands the test of time rather, and it goes far beyond baseball. In my interview with Julia from a few years ago, and I was just listening to this the other day, she said, Daddy, as she calls him, she says, Daddy is actually bigger now than he was back then when he was alive. And we talked about that. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think I kind of acknowledged it earlier in the conversation, but the fact of how dominant he was during his time. I mean, it was just the fact that he was hitting more home runs than multiple teams combined.
Right.
It just so set him apart in his age. But the reality is that he established over 100 records over the course of his career. That's significant, and it took many, many years for people like Roger Maris and Hank Aaron to break some of his most significant milestones.
Right. Mm-hmm.
He just established himself. He entrenched himself so much as the kind of the standard for the game that I don't think people have ever really forgotten that. And it's just hard to just fathom just how unique and how far apart he was just from just the general competition, not only in his time, but even today. He is the benchmark. And because he is the benchmark, that's why he's still at the top of everyone's mind. Even kids today, still have him as their biggest idol, which is just really impressive.
For sure. Okay, so now on your site, of course, I think preserving the legacy is I gather, one of the objectives of BabeRuthCentral.com as well?
Absolutely. It's the primary objective.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the humanitarian side of Babe. Back in 2010, he was inducted into the World Sports Humanitarian Hall of Fame. Julia was there, and I believe were you there as well? You accompanied her on that?
I did. It was a great experience.
Tell us a little bit about that, what the event was like. I think Bill Jenkinson was speaking there, if I understand. So I've read in some circles people were surprised, well, why did Babe Ruth win this humanitarian award? Tell us a little bit about why and something about that event itself.
Yeah, so first, it is many times a surprise, again, because what people tend to know of Babe from the media is more of, yes, he was a great baseball player, but maybe not quite so respectable off the field, which again is not really accurate. Babe Ruth, over the course of his life, was involved in numerous charities. In fact, I was talking with my dad about it recently. Over the course, over 100 different charities that he supported in some way.
Right. Yeah.
The amount of orphanages and hospitals that he visited to tend to the sick or needy children is just phenomenal. And so one of the things I've had the opportunity to do with Babe Ruth Central is talk to a few people. Unfortunately, given how much time had passed, not as many as I'd like, but talk to people that knew the Babe firsthand. One of which was Bill Werber, who was a teammate of mine. And he recalls seeing it just surrounded by kids, signing signatures for hours, even though he had personal obligations that he basically overlooked so that he could please all the children. And that was just him at his core, wanting to please children and doing it time and time again. And that's just not something that you hear of these days with sports celebrities, not to that extent.
No, right. And I have to tell you, last June I was down at Cooperstown. I interviewed the curator who put the revised Babe Ruth exhibit together. And I also spent an afternoon at the Giamatti Research Center, the library there, and went through the Babe Ruth scrapbooks. And I tell you, that was one heck of an experience. There's 25 Babe Ruth scrapbooks, and they went through them. They were very, very kind and gracious helping me there. And these are physical textbooks, books. You kind of pull out one by one and open them up. And you get a sense of how he was, I mean, obviously in a fishbowl where, there are sports writers who cover teams. They had writers in those days. Their beat was Babe Ruth. They didn't just cover the Yankees. They covered Babe Ruth. He was their beat. So everything he did was reported. But even more so than the stories were all the photographs I saw of him visiting hospitals, orphanages, disabled kids. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Doesn't matter what year you're talking about, and these photos are everywhere. And these are kids of all races, all ethnicities, and it really kind of hit me over the head because I don't think I realized it to the extent until I went through those scrapbooks. It was really something.
That sounds like a special experience when I have to try at some point.
Oh yeah, you have to make a reservation, but I think when you tell them who you are, there's not going to be a problem. But they were very, very nice. But it was really just something going through all those scrapbooks. It was quite an experience. Now I understand a number of years ago you were at a friend's wedding and you met someone who also has quite a baseball pedigree. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was at a friend's wedding. He actually was a representative for quite a few sports celebrities. He's a family friend, and he also represented Josh Gibson, who many times is called the Black Babe Ruth. And his great-grandson, Sean Gibson, was at the wedding, and we had the opportunity to meet. And once we learned who each other were respectively,
yeah.
We felt in kind of an instant connection just because of the comparisons that are made about our respective great-grandfathers.
So that was just a chance meeting, the two of you?
Absolutely,
yeah.
Yes.
All right. Now, Josh Gibson, of course, was considered the best position player in the old Negro Leagues, and in his career, the stats say he hit over 800 home runs, but he never got a chance to play in Major League Baseball because of segregation.
Yes.
Yeah. So this you and Sean Gibson kept in touch, and he runs the Josh Gibson Foundation out of Pittsburgh, I understand. But there's a little more to the story too, where you commissioned a painting. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So Sean and I had stayed in touch, and we just felt like at some point it would be good to try and do something to kind of bring our great-grandfathers together in some way. We had larger visions that, given timing, ultimately didn't play out. But the one thing that we were able to realize, which we're really proud of, is we commissioned a piece that was turned into a Jeekley called Josh and the Babe. And it's really meant to be kind of a statement piece. And it's a really well done piece, done by Bill Purdom. But it's a concept piece that just kind of takes into consideration what could have been Josh Gibson and Babe Ruth could have played against each other. What would that competition look like? And
a home run derby between the two.
Without a doubt. And it's a statement that is unfortunate that these two great individuals, because it would have been a home run derby, that they really didn't get that opportunity to play against each other due to segregation.
Yeah, and Josh Gibson, I mean, I read his background. His wife died giving birth to twins. He was very young, and he himself died, I believe, at the age of 35. So, and never got a chance to play in Major League Baseball. And I've heard people say, they know as great as Jackie Robinson was, even other players from the old Negro Leagues, they say Josh Gibson was the best player in the old Negro Leagues.
That's my understanding as well.
Yeah. So the painting, you did a number of prints. I guess it was like a limited edition that you did, and monies went to the Josh Gibson Foundation, and also was it the Babe Ruth League? Is that what happened?
Yes, a part of the proceeds to go to those charities, correct?
Right. Okay. Well, that's a great story, and you were kind enough to let us use the image of that painting with Josh Gibson and Babe Ruth together. And I did a presentation a while back, and I showed that image, and the people in the room were really quite taken with it. Of all the photos that I showed them as presentation, that's the one that kind of really hit home of the two of them. So it was quite powerful. So what are you going to be doing on in terms of the future, preserving the legacy of your great grandfather? I guess the website, of course, is going to continue, and you have new things coming up there as well.
Yeah, always trying to think of new opportunities for sure. So for one thing, we do something that's not necessarily quite as known is that Babe Ruth was known for some pretty inspirational quotes.
Yes.
And so we started a line of Babe Ruth inspirations T-shirts with one of his quotes. There's four that predominantly kind of come up that are considered pretty inspirational, and so we use each one of those quotes. Like every strike brings me closer to my next home run.
Right.
Never let the fear of striking out get in the way.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that we've done to. Again, the thought is that if with products, there's an opportunity to kind of get that face time, if you will, with the everyday consumer and baseball fan.
Yeah.
So that's one way in which we promote them. But also, Babe Ruth was actually involved in creating a sweet relish. There's a longer story to it, but we actually are bringing to market something that Babe originally created. And it's not just any relish. It's phenomenal, and it's unique, and it's something we're really excited about and proud that's a part of our family. Just another aspect of the Babe to be proud
that
of.
I didn't know about. No.
Yeah, and we're close to bringing it to market, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, of all the Babe Ruth quotes, and the ones you said, of course, are very inspirational, and they've been used in church sermons and everything else. My favorite Babe Ruth quote is a simple one: "Watch my dust."
Yeah.
Which kind of says it all. So we've been talking with Brent Stevens, great-grandson of Babe Ruth. Brent, I want to thank you for joining us today in the Babe Ruth Legacy interviews, and let's definitely keep in touch, and good luck with the website.
Thank you very much.